Hello students, welcome to your types of research video. This video is going to explain what the two major kinds of research are that you'll be looking at, qualitative and quantitative, and explain how to identify which is which and how each might be useful for your paper. So when you're doing any kind of research, usually the end goal is writing a big research paper, which we are doing in this class. In this class, you'll be finding your own articles throughout this module. You'll start with the first one, and you'll be filling out these notes that I provided, which ask you these questions. Who or what was the subject of the study? What kind of research was conducted? Qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods? This is mainly what we're going to be looking at today in this video. And then you're going to answer the following when you pick out your articles. How was the data gathered? How was the data analyzed? What were the findings? And what is the significance of the findings? So these things should be things you should be able to gather from an article after you've spent some time reading and taking notes, if you really understand it. Now, if you find that there's any areas you cannot answer, then you want to bring that to class and have a meeting with me or talk with some of your peers about what you're missing, and maybe someone can help you figure that out. So in order to understand the difference between the types of research, I've selected two articles for you to look at. These are available on Blackboard and in this module. So you're going to look at two articles that are on the same type of topic, but there are two different kinds of research being done. So the first one is this one by Grant. That's the author's last name. And then this one is by Hovey and Ferguson. And you'll notice in APA that we always refer to people by their last names. In the beginning of an article, often they list the person's first name, but when you cite them, you should always use their last name. Okay, so that's just kind of a side note to keep in mind for the future when you start writing. So you'll see both of these topics are project-based learning. The first article by Grant, Learning, Beliefs, and Products, Students' Perspectives with Project-Based Learning. The other one is using project-based learning with exceptional and diverse students. So if I was writing a research paper on project-based learning, these might be the types of articles that I find in my search. And so I'm going to use these as examples to tell you how to look at something that you found and decide what kind of research it is, and just see if it's relevant for your paper. Because sometimes we'll find articles that seem great, but they're just not relevant to our topic. So we have to determine that. Part of determining that is just understanding the general research that was done itself to make sure that we know what we're looking at. So let's take a look at this first one. This article by Grant, we can see that it's not too long ago, 2011. It's a little old, but for this type of topic, it's still relevant. It's from Interdisciplinary Journal of Problem-Based Learning, so this is obviously a place where they do a lot of publishing on this topic, okay? The main thing we're going to start with is looking at the abstract. Okay, so when we look at the abstract, this is basically a paragraph that should summarize what the whole article is about. So I'm going to take a look at that, and we're going to read through it and see what we can identify here. Project-based learning offers promise as an instructional method that affords authentic learning tasks grounded in the personal interests of learners. While previous research has presented results of learning gains, motivations, and teacher experiences, limited empirical research has presented student perspectives in project-based learning. So already we can see what they're doing. They're setting the context for their research. They're identifying why this topic is important, why there's a need to do more research on this. So that's always good. Usually an author does that in the abstract. Let's continue. This research sought to explore how learners created projects. A qualitative case study design was employed with 5 purposefully selected participants from 8th grade geography at a private day school. From interviews, observations, and document collection, 5 themes emerged from what influenced participants' projects and what the participants learned. Now, before I read these themes, I can already tell what kind of research this is. I've identified it, and that is common. It should be identified for you right there in the abstract. That's what the abstract is for. Okay, so we know it's a qualitative case study. We have 5 participants, and we can see who those participants are. They're 8th graders from a private day school. And the way they gathered the information, how did they get this data that they analyzed? They used interviews, meaning they sat down and asked questions of the participant, the 8th grader. Observations, that means they observed the 8th grader probably in class, maybe working on some projects. and document collection. Document collection means that they actually gathered documents and analyzed them. And often in education, what that means is they have used student work and analyzed that. I've done this kind of research a lot. It's common in education. We look at student work to see what they're learning, right? 5 themes emerged. Okay, so now let's see if we can tell what these themes are. We have internal influences, external influences, beliefs about projects, tools for technology-rich environments, and we have here learning outcomes and products. The first 4 themes describe influences to shape the 5th theme, learning products. The term learning products was used to describe both the learning acquired by the participants and the learning artifacts the participants produced as part of the instructional unit. Implications for practice and future research are considered. This is very important. This should always be included, especially in qualitative research, but it's usually in quantitative as well. Implications means, so what is implied by this research? What should we take away from it? Why does this matter for our field? So it's important that we look at all these things, and usually they're right up front in the abstract. Okay, so I can tell these things about this article before I even read the whole thing. Let's take a look now. Since we've done this for one article, let's do the same thing for this one. Let's take a look and see if we can figure this one out. So here's the abstract, a little shorter, and we'll talk about that in a second. You can kind of see that there's a trend here with the longer and shorter articles and abstracts. Right here, the current exploratory study analyzes survey results regarding teacher perspectives and experience with project-based learning, or PBL. Particular attention was paid to teachers serving diverse learners with exceptionalities such as learning disabilities or giftedness. The analysis suggests PBL is perceived as an effective measure when working with diverse and exceptional students. However, while teachers are aware of PBL as an instructional strategy, practitioners may lack a clear understanding of PBL methodology. Now, you'll see that this particular abstract here gives a shorter, more straightforward summary of the research, and that's because this is a different kind of research. If you look, we can see how they gathered it. It says that they gathered it with a survey, right? So we have right here, exploratory study. Ooh, that's not what I wanted. There we go. Oh, my highlighter's not working on this one. Oh, well. So we have an exploratory study, and we have survey results. Okay, so we can already tell the difference between this one and that one. If we look at this one, it's a qualitative case study. And a case study is common in qualitative research. A case study means I take a small group of people, or sometimes it's a larger group, but usually it's small, like this one had 5. We're going to take this group of people and we're going to study their experience in this whole scenario, particularly project-based learning. In this one, we're still talking about project-based learning, but we're giving something more straightforward like a survey. There's no way to interpret the results of a survey in the same way you would interpret document analysis or interviews or observations, right? This is going to be more detailed kind of data, and I have to interpret what it means. And this one is going to be very straightforward. I still have to do some kind of context for what that survey tells us, but in general, there's not a ton of different ways to interpret survey results. They tend to be straightforward. They are based upon numbers, percentages, and it's quantifiable. So that's why this is called quantitative research. It tends to look at quantities, numbers, statistics, things like that, and it tells us something about our field based on those numbers. This kind of research is called qualitative research, and it's because we're trying to look at the story behind what's happening. We're trying to tell a story of someone's experience as opposed to produce straightforward facts and numbers. So both of these would be valuable to my research paper on project-based learning. One type of research is not more valuable than another. They're just different, and each will inform your research topic in a different way. So let's just briefly take a look at this article first, and then we'll come back to the quantitative one. And if I found this, and I'm thinking this might be good for my research as a source, now before I jump in and start reading the whole thing, I know what kind of research it is. I know this is qualitative. So I'm going to go and I'm going to just get familiar with the article first. I want you to notice something up here. It is 34 pages. The quantitative is 15 pages. That's common, okay, because it takes a lot more pages to tell a story than it does to tell numbers, right? That, again, doesn't mean that the longer one is more valuable or the shorter one is more valuable. Often the longer one is going to take a while to read through, but you also need certain kind of vocabulary and a skill set to understand the quantitative one. So they're going to be equal, they're just different, okay? So let's take a look at the headings. We've read the abstract, we get an idea of what this is about. Let's look at the headings. There's an introduction here. This time the author is going to spend some time explaining, and you'll see they're often citing a lot of different people. You see this? There's lots of different authors cited here. And that's because the author is showing us that they've done their research ahead of time before they did this particular project. They want you to know the whole background of context of why they did this and why it's such a big deal to look into project-based learning. So they're going to give you an introduction to the topic. Let's keep going. Now they have statement of the problem. This is going to explain why they specifically chose to do their specific project in that setting. Okay, why did they pick that particular thing? And they'll give you an explanation for that. Methodology. All articles should have some space in there where they talk about how they did their research. How did they gather this data? How was it done? That's your methodology. So let's take a look here just to get a brief overview of what it was. It says the case study method was used in order to study both process and products of learning over time and was bounded by project-based learning unit. That means they only looked at this one unit. They didn't study these kids all year and everything they do, just this one unit as an example. Case study affords multiple methods for data collection, including interviews, observation, and artifacts. So this person's explaining how they did it, and if you were taking your notes, that would be relevant, right? We would want to know who or what was the subject. Okay, in this case, it would be 8th graders in geography class. What kind of research was conducted? We already know this is qualitative. How was the data gathered? We've already figured that out without even reading the whole thing. We know they did interviews, we know they did document analysis, and let's see, what was the other one? We said observations, right? So I would put those here. How was it analyzed? Well, I would have to keep reading to find that out, and I would also be able to find the findings. Okay, so as I keep reading, the context are going to tell me about the school, description of the unit, the research that was done, what kind of unit were they doing, what was the project like, and I'm going to get a better feel for how this is put together. Now we get often these kind of big charts that give you a comparison of pieces of the research, steps that they went through. They'll tell you a little bit about the participants. This is different than in a quantitative. You'll see we won't spend a ton of time talking about our participants in a quantitative because there's more of them. And we're not concerned with who they are, their experience necessarily, and how they felt about things. In a quantitative, we just want to know if they understand something. We're going to ask more straightforward questions. So this one, in a qualitative, you're going to see a lot more explanation of who is involved and who these people are. So you can see the subjects here described, who the students are, data sources. Okay, so what kind of data did they get? What did they do with it? This section right here would fit very nicely here into how is the data analyzed? What did they do with these interviews? What did they do with these observations? Here's where they would explain that. Okay, so we're going to keep going, and I'm just doing a brief skim or scan over this article to see what's in it and if it would be relevant to my research. And this is the same process you should go through as you find articles. Don't get married to it right away and read the whole thing. If I spent 34 pages of reading time on this and then found out it wasn't important for my article, or my research, I mean, then I wasted some time. So I want to just look at the headings and get familiar. It's going to tell me how they analyze that data. And then they should give me some kind of explanation for how they know their research is trustworthy. That's a nice way to assure the reader. They don't always call it this, but there's some kind of way that they tell you how they kept the data secure, how they are interpreting those findings to show you that it is valid. And then there's also going to be a long, several pages probably, where they explain each of their themes they found. Now, the way a qualitative research study works is they gather all kinds of data, And they look at that data multiple times. And whenever they start to see the same ideas come out again and again, that becomes a theme. So they don't go in with a hypothesis. They don't go in looking for any particular thing. It's a more of a broad question. They might look at what do students gain out of project-based learning, very broad question, and then these themes will start to be obvious after a while. And so you'll see that they'll spend a lot of pages explaining it because in qualitative research, we need more space to explain that. It's going to take a lot more detail. Let's jump to the end after the last theme here, and we're going to see how they conclude this. Oh, they give some nice little work samples. That's interesting. Implications for practice and research. This is always very important. We want to know, why does this matter? This is going to tell me as a writer of a research paper if this is something that I think is going to match my topic. Is it going to inform my question of what I'm trying to find out? Okay, so this is the type of thing you want to look for. It often is called implications. Sometimes it's called conclusion. Usually authors will use things like implications for the field or something like that. Okay, so that's going to tell me if this is relevant. Let's jump over to our other article and do the same process. We're just going to do a nice scan to see what's in here and see if it works for my project. I already know it's a quantitative study. I already know they use survey. So I'm going to look through this and see what their headings have to say. Project-based learning. So this is basically the same as the other one where they had an introduction. They're going to tell you what project-based learning is, why it matters, why is it important. They're going to give you that whole background knowledge that you need to see if this is, are they talking about the same thing I'm talking about when I say project-based learning? And that's important to note. Theoretical basis for project-based learning. Again, they're giving you some context for why it's so important. Empirical support. So they're going to show you that other people have proven that this is valid. And then right here, project-based learning with exceptional and diverse students. Now they're getting a little more specific to their topic. They're not just looking at project-based learning in general. They're looking at project-based learning for these exceptional and diverse students. They're going to give you a lot more articles and books and things that they have cited to prove to you that they've become an expert on this topic as well before they did this research. Okay, now we get to the meat of it here, the methods. So how did they actually gather this data? How did they do this research? They're going to explain it to you here. It's a quantitative survey. It tells you about how they delivered the survey. You see it says web-based. So they're going to tell you a little bit about it. And this is important, not because you need to really cite this in your paper, but because you want to know that this is valid research, that they didn't just, put a survey on Facebook or something. You want to see that they did their job correctly, and you can see that they got an IRB approval, they planned this out, how they deliver it, who they give it to. They're going to tell you a little bit about their participants. Notice this is going to be a little different than the other article. They're talking about participants here. That's the people who participate in the study, by the way. But they're not going to tell you everything about each person. They're just going to give you a general overview of this population of people. These people tend to be anonymous in this study. We want this study to come out and show people what this is like, but we don't want to know who they are or their personal lives. So that's always left out. We don't have that kind of context. We might have what kind of district they work in. You'll see right here it says recruitment procedures involve emailing, links to the survey to people enrolled in a large Southwestern University's College of Education. So they're not being very specific on purpose. They want you to see that this is just a general finding here from this type of context. So you could say, okay, I get it. They're taking a bunch of teachers enrolled in this program and giving them a survey. And we can jump ahead to the measures. This is how they actually took those results and what did they do? How did they analyze what they got out of it? Okay, it tells you what kind of software they used. You'll notice it's short, and that's because it's quantitative. They tend to be a little more straightforward, but there's a lot of really high-level vocabulary in here, so you might have to look things up if you don't understand it. Okay, results, they're often in percentages or charts or tables. So they give you these kind of description of how they design their survey here. We can see that they have percentages and they have descriptors of like effective, somewhat effective, agree, somewhat agree, those kinds of things. And this is the type of thing you're going to see often in quantitative research articles. You're going to see these kind of charts. And these can be a little overwhelming to look at first. Okay, so don't look at something like this and think, oh, No, I don't understand this. I'm not going to use this one. If you don't understand this chart that you're looking at, that's okay. Just get familiar with what they did in their research, jump to the conclusion and see if it's relevant. And if it seems like it is, then you can use it. Go back, and later on you can figure out what all this means. That doesn't mean that just because it looks overwhelming, you shouldn't use it. You should probably still read to see what the results are and see if it makes sense for your topic. So you're going to see a lot of these numbers, and they have a different title for their ending here. Instead of implications, they have discussion. Okay, same idea. They're going to discuss now why this is so important. So I'm going to read this section and decide if this seems like it makes sense for my research topic. Now, some articles will include things like this, limitations. Limitations would be explaining how is this study limited. It's not comprehensive of everybody, right? We are going to explain, well, it's limited in the fact that it's only pre and in-service teachers at this area in this university. Doesn't mean this is what all teachers think, right? But they also include recommendations for future research, which is good because we can see what other people might be doing in the future. Or if I decide that I really like this topic and I'm very interested in it, when I get into my own classroom, I could do some research on this in my own class and see if I can further this area of study. Okay, so you're going to see they're going to include an appendix often in a quantitative because they want you to see exactly how they designed their study. They're going to even give you copies of the questions and the choices of answers that people had to do the survey. Okay, so now you know the difference between qualitative and quantitative research, and you can fill out all these answers for each of them and do your best. If there's something you're not sure about, then bring it to class and share your question and we'll figure it out together. Good luck and keep going with your module and have fun doing your research on your topic.